Hello and welcome to Blackbird.AI's Lunch and Learn. This is called From Outrage to Impact, Understanding and Mitigating Narrative Threats. My name is Dan Patterson. I'm the head of corporate communications here at Blackbird.AI. And today we are exploring a critically important topic for all professionals. That's narrative manipulation. And we're not just talking about rumors or misunderstandings. This is about coordinated efforts designed to distort perception, disrupt operations, and damage reputations. We have two experts to help us better understand this topic. Dr. Bilyana Lilly is a globally recognized expert in information operations, and she's the author of Digital Mindhunters and Russian Information Warfare. Dr. Lilly's work sits at the intersection of policy and intelligence, and she has real-world cyber operations experience. She holds a PhD in policy analysis and 3 master's degrees, including an honors degree from Oxford University. Her career includes the work with the United Nations, Deloitte, the Rand Corporation, and now she runs corporate geopolitical strategy at Accenture. She also serves on advisory boards for Night Dragon and Run Safe Security. And we are joined by Blackbird.AI CEO and co-founder Wasim Khaled. He is a leader in narrative intelligence. Wasim's background is in computer science, and at Blackbird, he runs defense, cyber, and risk intelligence to help governments, organizations, and companies better understand narrative attacks. Wasim has been featured in publications like Fortune, TechCrunch, Wired, the New York Times, Bloomberg, NPR, and the Wall Street Journal. And quick note for you watching and listening to this, you can feel free to drop your questions into the chat at any time. We'll keep an eye on them and bring your questions into the conversation. Okay, let's jump in and get going. Wasim, let's get started here. Can you first define terms? What is a narrative attack, and how do these threats begin, spread, and ultimately become harmful?
Sure thing. Looking forward to the discussion today. All right. So, a narrative attack. So, a narrative attack is really an assertion online that shapes perception about a person, a place, or thing, really across the information ecosystem, but also that can cause harm. It has some sort of intent driving it usually. So, we like to think of narrative attacks as deliberately manipulating public perception. Now, these can be things like false narratives, but they can also just be taking an opportunistic look at anything to turn that into harm for an organization. So, unlike your traditional cyber threat that focuses on exfiltrating data or breaching a physical system, narrative attacks operate in the digital ecosystem, and they shape how people think about a company, an executive, a product, policy, or an issue. So, for threat intelligence operators, I would think of like a typical zero-day exploit. And the way to think about this is that zero-day exploits don't just exploit code anymore. They breach human perception, right? It hijacks public perception and opinion about almost anything. And when that's done right and amplified by an intent-driven threat actor or a cyber criminal or nation state, a narrative attack can escalate quickly. It can seem to hit you almost out of nowhere, and it can target not just an entire organization, but an executive, stock price, or cause major financial, operational, and reputational harm. So you may not always hear about things referred to as a narrative attack. This is actually a term that we created probably less than 2 years ago as a placeholder for this kind of whole basket of problems, from deepfakes to generative AI to really a tradecraft that's been getting built that gets billions of dollars spent against it almost every year. And so a narrative attack was something we came up with to hold this intelligence gap that we can help fill for organizations. I guess the last thing I would add here is the world is kind of recognizing this problem is growing. So the World Economic Forum has called disinformation the #1 global risk for the second year in a row. And Gartner predicts that by 2028, there'll be 30 billion plus being spent battling malinformation, disinformation, and misinformation. And a large portion of that will be coming from marketing budgets and cybersecurity budgets. So it's something that that leaders really need to start thinking about.
Bilyana, Wasim alluded to a moment ago that Blackbird AI helped build and develop the category of narrative intelligence, but you really have experience seeing and confronting narrative attacks for a long time. Based on your 20 years in cybersecurity, I wonder if you could share a few examples with us.
I can give you thousands of examples of different disinformation narratives or information operations or influence operations where they have used certain deliberate attempts to manipulate perceptions through the digital world, mainly through content. And this could be text or visual images. We can talk about particularly how they try to manipulate perceptions. And in the Russian mindset, this playbook is called information warfare. And disinformation or these types of pernicious, malicious narratives are usually coupled with other activities, and they're all a part of a playbook. So if we look at how, what types of examples I can provide, we can go back decades, depends on whether you want to go pre-Cold War Russia, Cold War Russia, post. I would probably stick with the past 10 years, let's say. And we have seen, for example, in the war in Ukraine, the Russian government and other nation states, so this is just one example, use this type of narrative to erode the morale of the opposing force. So both the population and soldiers. And there was this statistic, I believe about a year ago, that the Ukrainian government and various stakeholders that are battling such types of narratives deal with about 1,000 of these different narratives per month. So the volume is intense. And examples are, for example, deliberately spread information that Ukrainian President Zelensky is sick, or that he's been hospitalized, or that he has been even assassinated. Deliberately spread narratives about corruption of certain heads of state or political figures that are not necessarily aligned with the Russian government's objectives and agenda. So in those particular cases, those narratives are used to change perceptions, to erode local policies, or to erode the will to fight in the event of war.
It's fascinating. Okay, so for both of you, this question is for what are the telltale signs that a wave of outrage is manufactured and not organic? Bilyana, let's stay with you. I wonder if you could provide us with some of those telltale signs or examples.
So for me, from what I have seen, and Wasim, I'm sure can elaborate, there are several different characteristics that I pay attention to. First is the velocity with which the message spreads. It's typically unorganically and unnaturally high. And there is a hashtag that becomes popular, a keyword that becomes trendy, and often there is no triggering event before that happens. Then you also see a synchronization of a lot of accounts on social media. And in the case of nation states, the architecture for disseminating those pernicious narratives and conducting narrative attacks is a lot larger. So you would see coordination between different accounts on social media, but you will also see heads of state or very senior people in political positions also propagating the same narrative. You will see cultural centers, you will see even the Orthodox Church, in the case of Russia, propagating the same narrative. So the coordination, the synchronization of the message across different stakeholders is very telling, including state-sponsored media. They immediately pick up such narratives. And then the third is, if we stay within the digital space, to me, it's very telling to see who are the accounts engaged in proliferating the particular narrative. And I look at their profiles. For example, if we take LinkedIn as an example, we all, I think I'm not the only one, Wasim, I think you're similar, and then you too, we take care of our accounts. We want our social media presence to be accurate. We put a professional photo as our profile photo. We list the history of our occupation. We even put some of our competencies there, certifications we've taken. We engage with people, we post. So our profiles are well developed, and there's a history of engagement, and they haven't been recently created. When we see a narrative attack spread, typically some of the profiles that are resharing and acting with the particular narrative, trying to amplify it, are not well developed. The photo will be AI generated, or there won't be any profile photo at all. The accounts wouldn't be populated with a history of the particular individual. The person will not have a lot of shared contacts outside of similar fake accounts that are sharing the same message. So once you identify those issues with the account, I would say this is when the alarm should go off.
Wasim?
Yeah. So telltale signs is kind of a way of thinking about signals that are under the radar for most people historically, right? And so we think about this a lot. We thought about this in the early days of building the platform. And the name of the game was, how do you surface not only these telltale signs that take a lot to see, but how can you also see other signals that would have been impossible even if you threw 10,000 people at it, because only technology can see like the entire macro ecosystem and shift back and forth in time to understand like pattern recognition within certain fabrications or manufacturing of controversy or narratives, right? So our it's almost like the founding principle of trying to understand the environment was creating signal out of the noise that would let you see things that could have never been seen before. And manipulation of narrative is that manufactured outrage as kind of a cornerstone for a lot that happens, whether it's a boycott or a protest or an attack on a facility. So you think about the actors, they're opportunistic, they're waiting for anything, they're waiting for maybe an HR policy change, a product release, a random comment on social media from an individual who had some sort of reaction to a product, right? But they'll jump on that. So remember, it doesn't have to be completely fabricated or false information. They will jump on that thing opportunistically, and then they will use everything from generative AI to deep fakes to bot networks to drive that narrative in a way that's going to hit your organization and use your organization as kind of a means to an end to drive some sort of objective. Now, it could be a grifter that's maybe trying to make a buck on a short sell, or it could be something more political. It could be geopolitical in nature. But the thing to really take away is, within this kind of fabricated controversy around a narrative attack is you can take a single post, you can scale it deliberately, and then everyone's impacted in your entire ecosystem, your customers, your suppliers, your executives, your board, and your shareholders, company performance. And so what we find, no matter how large the organization or how sophisticated their threat intelligence teams, is they don't have visibility into narrative attacks that are targeting their company or their executives. So they are really kind of flying blind when it comes to this particular category, even if they might be world-class in traditional threat intelligence. So just as an example, though, we've seen cases where a fabricated narrative or a deep fake goes really viral, amplified by bots, and then they're used to discredit products, business leaders, maybe frame a company as unethical. And then it doesn't really matter if it was amplified by bad actors. These attacks damage reputations overnight. And then it's really, really hard to come back from that. And we have seen companies lose not just billions, but tens and billions of market value and never get it back, right? And this has already happened. These are not black swan events. They're happening more and more frequently. And so, again, the notion of telltale signs and manufactured controversy is, again, where it all starts and something you have to be on top of.
Wasim, you said a key phrase there. It's hard to come back from a narrative attack. What are the top use cases, examples of threat actors and nation states targeting? What are they looking for? What industries and what type of attacks?
This is to this day often surprising for a lot of people that we talk to because people have an idea of what this, I suppose, this attack surface or the problem space actually is. And in most people's head, it's pretty limited, right? But we have seen all manners of industries and I suppose attack surfaces targeted. So of course, like there's just general crisis events that can be amplified. So something happens, it gets a lot of attention, and then the narrative attacks dogpile onto that particular incident. But think about cyber attacks, or more specifically, a completely synthetic cyber attack, a fabricated breach that then creates all kinds of confusion and takes people's eyes off the ball, defocuses the company at a critical time. There's executive targeting. So there's been massive increases where we look at narrative intelligence as it drives executive targeting, death threats to CEOs, executive teams, etc. There's geopolitical narratives, there's financial market manipulation and stock manipulation. Of course, there's brand reputation revolving around cancel culture. There's labor relations, physical security. I mean, I could go on and on. Supply chain, insider threat, M&A and due diligence. All of these spaces and these categories are driven by public perception and public opinion to some extent. And by looking at the signal around it, you can get a kind of leading edge and early start on when there is an escalation that is required here from, say, green to yellow to orange to red. And that could be whether you're in the PR and comm space, the threat intelligence space, or the physical protection space. You need that leading edge to change your posture, be more resilient, and just get a head up on the adversaries.
Bilyana, any examples of threat actors and nation states targeting?
Oh yeah, I wanted just to comment on one point that Wasim made because I think it is so critical, and then we'll go to some examples. Wasim, when you mentioned that companies get attacked with narrative attacks, that they're subject targets of them, companies and states as well, and sometimes it's hard to recover from them at all, and the losses that they incur or the public perception damage that they incur is permanent. There's research that shows that sentiment of the market is a very strong predictor of profit. And sometimes I think this is critical to understanding why this is important. There are certain narrative attacks that are easy to dispute. And it's very important that you catch them early and triage early and create a fact-based assessment of investigation of where they originate and so on. Sometimes it's very easy to identify the particular narrative attack's origin, refute it, and restore the damage. For example, there was deep fake of an explosion of the Pentagon a few years ago, and that resulted in $500 billion drop in the stock market almost immediately. But then the stock market recovered. So there was a massive loss that could have guaranteed disruptions across the entire economy if it actually was permanent. But that was one deep fake. Imagine a whole set of accounts that are proliferating a story across different channels, social media, state-sponsored media, actual individuals. Those narratives, once they get out of control and spread, it is incredibly difficult to counter them and restore the damage done on whatever its brand reputation, trust in public institutions, election, voting, anything. So this is a key point. And with regards to Dan, back to your question now. With regards to different examples in nation states, we have nation states that actually have built into their military structures and government structures budgets, and then respectively corresponding capabilities to achieve certain objectives through narrative attacks or psychological operations or disinformation. And those budgets are growing. And there is training, military training that has been conducted, for example, in different states that are major adversaries of the United States ever since the Cold War. There is even cooperation between adversaries that traditionally are, we describe them as frenemies. They are certain partners, but not necessarily allies. They have exchanged tactics, techniques, and procedures specifically focused on how narrative attacks can erode the adversary. So to me, this is such a big problem, not so much because the private sector, you can see certain attacks in the private sector that are more opportunistic. For me, this is a big problem because there's systematic investment and a doctrine in nation states that have resources to conduct these operations. And this is why companies as well as governments should care.
I want to stay on that theme and actually talk a little more about public institutions. Bilyana, why are public institutions and executives specifically and increasingly targeted by nation states? And maybe you can enumerate what is at stake right now.
So specifically why they're targeted by nation states, trust is a major component of the profitability of a company, of the standing and profile of any company. And Wasim hopefully agrees with this. Research has shown that from my experience with nation states and their playbooks, information warfare, this is basically our cognitive warfare or the free warfare's playbooks by different adversaries. They have different names, but typically in those playbooks, these are playbooks that are applied to foreign policy, and they are applied to achieve certain objectives by the nation states. And narrative attacks or psychological operations or disinformation narratives are a part of that playbook. And it is important for the private sector also to care, as well as governments that are targets by these operations, is because in that playbook, our adversaries don't just target the senior decision makers. They don't just target the military. They target our critical infrastructure. And according to CISA, that's, I believe, 14 critical infrastructure sectors, at least 14 critical infrastructure sectors that cover from energy to water and other facilities, the financial sector. They may be private actors, but they're targeted by nation states because that particular operation may achieve the foreign policy objectives of a nation state.
Wasim.
That was really, really well said, and I 100% agree with you across those points. And I guess the thing I would add to that is, when there's a narrative attack actually occurring, if you're an organization, that has a large brand or household recognition, right? Well, they're going to use your organization to essentially shoot through it to drive their objective forward. They use large brands and large entities and large personalities as almost like a lightning rod to drive and spread the message. And so that's why, it's kind of like the bigger you are, the harder you fall in a narrative attack, because that's kind of the way these actors roll. So, and I will say, like, banking and critical infrastructure has been a really, really big tailwind that is looking for the kind of technology we're selling because they understand that they are at risk now in ways that they never really thought about before.
I suspect both. Oh, I'm sorry, Bilyana, please.
Dan, I just wanted to add to this because we were talking about examples and just something occurred to me. Wasim, all fantastic points. Another critical sector that right now, for example, is subject to cyber operations and disruptions is if we think about what is currently important for our adversaries, and let's say Russia, most important thing is achieve some sort of victory in Ukraine. So what does this mean for their playbook abroad? Then they are targeting not only elections and politicians that are not pro-Russian, and they're trying to make sure that they instill governments or support governments that are pro-Russian, but also they're looking at what are the supply chains and the logistics for the war? How can they impact that? So any logistics hubs and companies that are focused on transporting hardware, software, any sort of weapons to Ukraine right now, especially through Poland, through Germany, are especially vulnerable to such attacks, narrative attacks, as well as cyber operations and other sabotage activities.
Let's stay on that theme of cyber. And maybe you just came very close to answering this, but from both of you, I'd love to know what protection against narrative or why protection against narrative attacks has become such a top priority for the cybersecurity industry and CISOs and cybersecurity teams and leaders right now. Wasim, you want to get us started?
Yeah, sure. So, I will say, particularly in the last 6 months or so, there's been a large influx of threat intelligence, CISO, and cybersecurity teams that have come to us for narrative intelligence. And you rewind back like a year ago or further, that wasn't really the case. And I think the reason for it is it's become much more clear that the current tools that are deployed don't really cover the narrative intelligence gap. So something we are not, but that people typically used to use was kind of what you call legacy social listening, sentiment, keyword-based topics, things of that nature. And then you have threat intelligence teams using applications that look at things like fake online accounts, right? So just accounts that were spun up and that's those are not the drivers of a narrative attack. Those are kind of two separate things that are adjacent. So currently, whether you're a cybersecurity team or a crisis comms team, the narrative attacks continue to blindside them. So they understood that in order to get visibility into narratives targeting their organization, those old tools are not really going to work because you need to understand with much higher resolution what's really happening in the system. So people think about sentiment. Well, what about fabricated sentiment? right? So it's very easy to game your traditional platform to think that there is a groundswell of negative sentiment, and that is designed to make your decision makers go in the wrong direction. Adversaries want you to kind of zig when they really are going to zag and hit you somewhere else. So you don't want to fall for that. You don't want to be baited into it. So they realize they need observability, and that's what we can typically give them. Then who's behind it? Is it bot influence? Those are complete gaps in your traditional profiles, right? And so what communities are engaging, for example. These are all just kind of impact analytics and gives you like decision dominance when something bad actually happens, when the adversaries have a leg up on you. So the reason they think that this is a top priority and this is the case is that they just understand that they need to make better strategic decisions that are data driven during times of crisis around what is an entirely new tradecraft and practice. And I'll tell you, like, it makes you much, much smarter as a leadership team when you're approaching your CEO, when you're approaching your entire board, when the board is approaching their shareholders. So narrative intelligence needs to be really in every board deck and as a practice within your threat intelligence comms teams. And then you can bring that all together and you're just smarter as an organization and you will not be caught off guard.
Bilyana.
Wasim, I love your terminology. I even wrote it down. Decision dominance. My alternative is information superiority. I love it. I love the
Perfect.
alliteration. So this is one of my favorite questions. Why should the cybersecurity operation within a company care? And this is actually what I've been building with a number of incredibly smart, extraordinary individuals within Accenture. We're building a geostrategic cyber risk practice, and we're integrating this whole idea of let's monitor the geopolitical space, including narrative attacks, and integrate that into cyber threat intelligence and the whole GRC function of an organization. And why is this important? There are a number of examples, and we've started to build a whole structure around this, and Wasim's actually tool can fit really well in this structure. You can look at the adversary and how they're conducting cyber operations and map on that type of cyber kill chain, but like expand it and talk about intent and other steps and map exactly where narrative attacks are being used. For example, narrative attacks are being used to rally hackers on deep and dark web forums and openly on social media to unite against a particular country and initiate, let's say, massive attacks. This was already done in 2007 in Estonia. We have examples going back to that in the 90s as well and today as well. So narrative manipulation is used to amass your forces, amass your cyber troops, amass your criminals. That's one example. Another example I wanted to give is that in certain situations, under certain conditions, an increased volume of narrative attacks can be a good predictor for cyber operations. For example, we see that before the escalation of conflict, before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we've seen this in other cases as well. So it could be one of those warning indicators. Instead of looking at IOCs, we can get predictive and look at warning indicators and see that if there is a spike in those attacks, in the volume of those attacks, there are likely to be certain types of operations against certain sectors and certain companies that are about to happen.
Alarming stuff. The stakes are high, but solutions exist. So, what are the smartest first steps an organization should take when facing a narrative attack? When this happens, Wasim, what should an organization do?
Yeah, I mean, first, in terms of the smartest first step is admitting that there's a gap to begin with, and not just kind of sticking your head in the sand and hoping these things won't hit you at some point. If you're large enough and you're in a high risk category, especially, it's only a matter of time. But I think if you prioritize this from the perspective of narrative intelligence, which companies are doing, because today we have people come in and say, we're looking for a narrative intelligence solution, or we're looking to guard ourselves against narrative attacks. That's the kind of first step along that path of being proactive around this kind of risk. But I think also just understanding how it works a little bit, and I could just talk a little bit about this for the benefit of anyone who's interested in understanding what will you actually be able to see that you couldn't see before. Think about narrative intelligence across these three lenses. This is just kind of frankly a metaphor for a ton of IP that we built that enables all this to work. But this is narratives, networks, and actors. Those are the lenses. The first, narrative, it's the what is being said, aggregating millions of conversations against many different platforms and risk ranking them into a set of narratives that matter to you, right? So that is the what. That is the what. And then you have the how, networks. The reason we think of that as the how is it's the connectivity between narratives, counter narratives, and actors. And so being able to see this kind of contagion-like spread through the network of a narrative enables you to see all kinds of things like bot amplification and fabrication. Uh, that's really critical because it gives you an idea of what the intention is behind those actors. And that leads us to the third lens, the actors themselves. And so we've got like 1,000+ models of actor types. So think like hyper agenda driven groups or state actors. So being able to see where those cohorts of individuals or accounts actually live within the network. And so when you kind of focus that lens of narratives, networks, and actors together into a higher resolution of detection, you're powering this kind of TTP framework, these tactics, techniques, procedures that enable you to see things and react in ways you never would have been able to do before, or sometimes not react. And as an example of how um, enabling these TTP frameworks are derived from these three lenses. We work a good deal with NATO, and they actually adopted our TTP framework for influence operations for advanced threat detection and response. It just lets them see things they couldn't have seen before. So being smart about it is really understanding that you need this higher resolution view in order to actually understand narrative dynamics, understand the manipulation of public opinion before they become major harm to your organization. It's just better strategic decision making at large.
Bilyana,
Yes, Dan?
smart first steps an organization can take when confronting a narrative attack.
I was going to say detect it as early as possible and triage among your different teams,
Mm.
which is maybe it's detected by the cybersecurity group, maybe it's detected by the IT group, maybe it's detected by corporate communications. But if it's in the digital space, chances are that corporate communications will be looking only at the problem as it's spreading, while their cybersecurity team should be able to have the technology expertise and the know-how to try to investigate and provide the forensics behind this operation. So I'd say detect it early on and then have a cert or like a playbook so you know which exactly stakeholders from your organization you need to pull to respond quickly. But then Wasim brought me even further back. You need to prepare before the attack happens. You have to have this the playbook, the incident response playbook before the attack happens and practice these scenarios so that you can respond as quickly as you can when an actual attack happens.
Bilyana, to that end, what advice would you give for cybersecurity teams facing narrative attacks?
Hmm. Investigate the problem as if it's a cyber operation. Map the TTPs, examine it, look for attribution, look for spread, examine the damage, and contain it.
Very smart. Wasim, um, maybe we can summarize some of these insights and then provide advice for anyone listening, but especially cybersecurity teams. How do you mitigate a narrative attack? How do you anticipate a narrative attack? And what do you do? What advice do you have?
So I think just the way to think about it is narrative attacks, think of it as tradecraft, right? That's an important distinction to make here. These are not just crises that happen organically. Of course, sometimes that is still the case, but we're talking about something that is having big dollars spent at the nation state level to influence large groups of people around very specific intent. So urgent need for defensive and detection technologies is a key component of all of this. So what Bilyana was saying was exactly correct. Our software and our technology helps enable those in a more rapid and high resolution way. I think generally for um, you know enterprise risk, market tailwinds are picking up, narrative attacks are picking up, so there's momentum driving this market. And I think threat intelligence demands this kind of detection. Otherwise, there's going to be a matter, I think, just I personally believe, a matter of negligence by boards, shareholders, and people who are trying to protect their organization from financial, physical, or reputational harm. That like, why wasn't something like this in place when there's technologies that can aid? It kind of like be not having a firewall on your network. You just don't do that today, and a couple of years from now, no one's going to be out there not having some sort of protection in place for narrative attacks, in my estimation. And then I would just say, frankly, we've spent 7 years building this technology in this space, and we're going to be innovating against adversaries. And it's the right time to address this threat, without which there's a lot of uncertainty. And so this is how you mitigate narrative risks effectively, because there is an AI-driven kind of arms race occurring, that everyone's been talking about for some time, and it's also being applied to this space. So I think this is just a way of getting out ahead of all of these issues now, in the way a lot of cybersecurity leaders did when everything went online decades ago. But it's a new era for and a new breed of threat.
Dr. Bilyana Lilly is the author of Digital Mindhunters and Russian Information Warfare. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your insights today. Wasim Khaled is the co-founder and CEO of Blackbird.AI. And thanks to you as well, Wasim, for these insights. And thanks to you for watching and listening. Keep an eye on your email inbox. We will be sending you follow-up details and information. I'm Dan Patterson in New York, reminding you to stay safe and stay secure. Know the narrative.